So we've kind of seen the current state of human space flight. And at this point in the American space program, it's easy to kind of feel like there isn't much of a future in human space exploration, right? I mean, we went to the moon 40 years ago. Our shuttle program no longer exists. We're relying on Russian rockets to even get to the International Space Station, and it's unclear how long that will exist. There's always talk about going to Mars, but will it ever happen? And so it can kind of feel like things have kind of fallen off the radar a bit, which is a big contrast to how people viewed space exploration maybe in the 70s or 80s. In fact, this book right here, Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and he was certainly not a religious person, but he was an excellent writer about astronomy. And one of the things that you'll get a sense, and you've seen some of his videos in earlier courses, but his first chapter of this book is called "The Shores of the Cosmic Ocean," and he talks really poetically about how humans have just taken the first step, that they've just touched their toe in the waters of the cosmos, right? And so this idea that there's an entire ocean for us to explore, and we've only just begun. And that leaves you with a sense of like promise, right? Like, wow, we've only started to explore the waters above the earth, and who knows what adventures it will take us on as we branch off and create new societies out in space. And that's kind of the direction we're going to be heading over the next few lessons. But before we get there, I think it's helpful to look backward, because we've had opportunities like this as a humanity in the past. And I think it's reasonable to expect that what will happen in the future will mirror those things that have happened in the past. So one of the perhaps best analogies is thinking about the European migration across the oceans, across the Atlantic Ocean to the new land, right, to the Americas, and how that unfolded. And I'm not a history expert, but I think we all have this sense that it was an economic pursuit, right? That's what drove the whole thing. Now the people on the boats, perhaps that was driven by more of an adventure, but undoubtedly making a lot of money was a part of the story, right? So going to the New World, discovering it was about finding new trade routes so that you could control those trade routes and control the flow of goods and be able to make money off that. But it was also about finding new kinds of things, like new spices or gold that you could use, or coffee, all these different kinds of things that had tremendous value where they couldn't be grown. So it was driven by this sort of financial desire, right? And that was what took priority over just about anything else. And so what concerns me is when I look at the history, in particularly of America, right, and how the Native Americans were treated when people came to this country, right? And you see this across not only America, but South America, how both intentionally and unintentionally through the spread of diseases, the native peoples were just completely decimated. So there was this rich culture that existed here for thousands of years, right, with these Native Americans, and yet because of these economic desires, we completely destroyed that culture in many, many ways. I think you can see a parallel with how today, how some companies and how some nations view the use of natural resources, right? And so it was not uncommon, not that long ago, that if a manufacturing factory had all kinds of sludge it needed to get rid of, it just dump it right into the river, right? It would just toss it out into a common area, and there was no accountability for that kind of activity, right? And again, it's an exploiting the land and its resources for the purposes of profit. And so what we're starting to see, right, is this transition in technology, and particularly rocketry. Now, another example that is given in the reading that you'll see is the internet, which I think is it's another interesting example of how this evolution has taken place, right? So the internet, you'll read, was started really ultimately by researchers and the government for Department of Defense, for military purposes, for communication, included more universities over time, and then it was released in the 90s to commercial internet service providers, right? And that's when you first saw things like America Online. Of course, maybe you weren't alive in 1995, but I was. And so I remember seeing these ads and using America Online, and it was a very different kind of internet. Like, it was super crazy, right? You just log into this main page, and then it wasn't like you could just go to any URL. It was like you'd click on the button for ordering flowers, or you'd click on the button for I don't know, movie previews or whatever. Actually, you couldn't watch videos back then because the internet was so slow. The point is that it was all just like a set homepage, and the only way that some company could get on that homepage was to pay America Online to be put on that homepage. So it wasn't nearly as open as our internet is today. But so as the internet becomes more open, you start to see something happen that I think, I don't know, as a viewer, as a user of the internet over, 20 years or more that it's been around, like the internet today, I don't know about you guys, but it just feels like a ton of junk, right? It's like, even as you're reading through a news site or something, you get just all this crud, like just gossip stuff about like look better, make more money. It's all what I would call base. Like, it doesn't aspire to our greatest possibilities, right? It doesn't push us to grow in positive ways, right? I think it's fair to say with the internet, and all the more so if we think about this in a biblical perspective, right? We think about what does God call us to become, and what is Christ's model for us in living a life that's been changed by the gift of salvation, right? And it's not towards making our bodies look the best they can be and getting 10,000 likes on our most recent profile picture, right? Those are the complete opposite of the kind of humility that we're called towards and the kind of servant-heartedness that we're called towards. And so I have to ask, like, okay, I know this is not a very popular question, but I look at, like, okay, I got this amazing technology. I can answer any question in the world just looking it up right here. I can talk to anyone in the world with this. That's incredible, right? Absolutely incredible. But I have to say, like, is my life, from a biblical perspective, is my life actually better because of this technology? Is the world a better place? Has the world been redeemed in some ways through this technology? And that's not at all obvious to me, right? And so when things are driven by our commercial desires, when they're driven by our human nature, right, they don't necessarily go in the right direction. I will say, just because that's a touchy, controversial topic I just raised, I will say that, like, I do think there are ways in which technology can be redeemed, just like all parts of our whole world, right? Like, everything is a good gift from God if we can, and through Christ, all things are redeemed, right? And so as agents of Christ in the world, we can work with him to redeem these things. And to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons that I'm making these courses, is it's a way of leveraging the amazing power of the internet to do good things. So that's just a side note. So as we think about these models, these examples from past, right? Like the human exploration across the ocean, the development of the internet, we can kind of project that onto space exploration, which is now just entering this sort of commercial phase, right? Where we're moving away from sort of heavily controlled, government-driven exploration, and we're kind of making it a free-for-all. I mean, anybody who wants to explore space, in principle, can apply for the permits and do it. So what you're going to do actually later in this lesson is look through a few of the different commercial space exploration websites and companies to see what their plans are, what they hope to do. And if we project to the future, we have to ask ourselves, like, what does that future look like? Does it look like the American Wild West, where, like, there really are no rules and it's kind of driven by, every town's got its bar and its brothel, and that's where people are going to space to engage in illegal activities that can't be done here on Earth? Or are we going up to space? Why would someone be going up there? Is it only the rich and famous who are going up there? Is it something that we're doing to make life here on Earth better? Um, there's some questions, and if history is a guide, I'd have to say I'm a little nervous about the value of what will come through that space exploration. There is an optimism, we talked about this before, I think, an optimism that scientists tend to have, like Carl Sagan expressed better than anyone, which is that, oh, humanity will reach for the stars, and we will accomplish great things, and it will save our whole species. But that is this fundamental worldview that some scientists have, which is that humans are the great hope for for the survival of our species, right? And that space travel is a huge part of that worldview. It's that in order for our species to survive for billions of years, eventually we're going to have to move our society off this planet into another one. That's where their hope lies. Of course, as believers, we recognize that our hope is not in people. In fact, that's the opposite. I think we have a lot of evidence to point that putting your hope in people is a bad idea, but that our hope is in Christ, who is the King of all at this point, right? All creation now is what is it? I gotta get the verse right? It's at the end of Matthew. Let me just read it, right? Because this is the one I often go back to. We often think of it's right by the Great Commission, right? Right. Jesus says, "Now all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me," right? And then therefore go and make disciples. But I want to focus. For me, it's always all authority belongs to Jesus, and that is our hope, and that's true today, and that's true for the rest of forever. So as you consider all of these crazy ventures for the future of space exploration, it is exciting. It's mind expanding to think, what does this really mean? And I'm curious to kind of get your take on whether you think this stuff will actually happen, and if so, is it good or is it bad, or what might be good about it, what might be bad about it? I hope you can kind of engage in those kinds of questions as you work through the rest of this lesson. Okay, cool. I guess that's it, and I will see you next time.